There's this great author and award-winning author, Britt Frank, who always talks about getting unstuck and getting aligned. Her phrase is, too often we optimize for the finish line when you should be optimizing for the starting line. So when you're trying to get something built and going, don't think about how it's going to finish and don't think about perfect. Just optimize for the starting line. Just like get started.
All right, welcome everyone. We have a special guest today, Suneet Bhatt. Welcome, Suneet. I'm really excited to talk to you. I wanted to start with kind of a background of how we know Suneet. So Suneet and I go way back, 20, almost 25 years ago now.
Five.
We used to work together, right? We used to work together at Prudential during the dot-com boom. And yeah, we had some good years there and then maybe not some good years there afterwards. So yeah, welcome, Suneet. I guess let's start with your background, kind of where you come from, your journey of what's brought you here, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's great interact. It's been great to sort of follow each other. The best of social media is the ability to stay in touch with someone like you who we worked together 25 years ago. And yet I still feel like I can catch up on the journey over the last quarter century. So it's the best of what social media can bring to us. In terms of my journey, look, the neat thing about me is I wanted to be a teacher, work in the nonprofit sector when I was an undergrad. And second generation Indian American, my parents were like, you want to do what? You want to be an English major? You want to work for go to the Peace Corps? Like, what language are you speaking? And so, I spent 20 plus years navigating my way through a series of experiments where I learned a ton, but ultimately decided that the place I was in was not the place I wanted to be. So that would have been Prudential for several years, done in Bradstreet, was doing, really webifying things at Prudential. We created the business development group, right? I have some patents from there, some patents from done in Bradstreet. Then I went to business school, jumped back into social entrepreneurship, learned that for all that benefit and all that passion I had, I didn't really have any operational or true business credibility. So I jumped out and into private equity backed businesses, startups, and VC backed businesses, raised a bunch of money, bought and sold a bunch of businesses within these organizations that I was a part of. The last company I did, we joined as board chair, then president, and went from 200 people to 1,200 people during the pandemic, one location around the world to five. Did that in less than 2 years and really loved the process. But the thing that kept clicking for me is I've always just loved working with people and helping them become their best, reach their potential, find their purpose. And so after I exited that business, I really leaned into that for the last 3.5 years. And that means that today I say that I help people and organizations get unstuck, build momentum, and find purpose. And I do that as an executive coach. I do that as a professor at Rutgers. And I do that as an EOS facilitator, helping high growth businesses with an operating system that helps them scale. And I think the that's sort of the conversation and the updates I've been providing that connected me with you all.
That's awesome, Suneet, and certainly in alignment with the whole reason that Chirag and I, really started the podcast here to, have more conversations about meaning, purpose, different journeys that we've been on. I think continuing to try to find our own meaning and purpose. And so hearing you and your journey and sort of what you now have decided to devote your time and energy towards, really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
joining us. So why don't
of
we
course.
start there, right? I mean, I think a lot of us, we have a playbook that we go through our academic and our grade schools through, and we go to college, and you just get out there and sort of conform to this playbook of, study hard, go get a good job, retire, and then you live your life. And I feel like so much of that has been disrupted even in our generations and our career trajectory, but even more so in young kids now. Can you speak to how much either diversity there is, or in a negative light, maybe confusion there is about how individuals can find their own purpose, starting as young as, hey, what do you do after you finish your grade school? What are you seeing, and what are your kind of insights there?
Yeah, look, that's a lot. I think the world order changed, right? And I think we've lived it, which is, I watched my dad spend his almost his entire career at one company, spend a majority of the time wondering if he was going to keep his job at this engineering firm. And when he left, they gave him like a little acrylic, piece for his desk, and like it was goodbye. And yes, they took care of him a bit with sort of pensions and things like that, but even that social contract has been disrupted, right? Uh, no longer is there mutual association and benefit between individuals and the companies that they work for. And so we have seen, potentially our parents not, thrive. We've seen a number of recessions. Our kids are entering the workplace and workforce at a time of tremendous uncertainty. We all have heard like generations now may be performing not as well as their parents, where the American dream was we could outpace your parents, right? And stand on their shoulders, right? And now we're living in our basements, right? So it's a different dynamic. So as a result of that, I think people have also started asking more questions of, hey, I'm not fulfilled. So I follow that playbook and I'm not happy on the other side of it. I'm just not fulfilled. So the chase felt clear. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't mine. And now you're seeing anxiety increasing, burnout increasing. All of these things are just at a global level increasing. And the fundamental challenge is we keep chasing other people's dreams for us and other people's expectations for us. And that's just not sustainable, right? We're living longer. All of these things are happening where you get the opportunity to ask these questions. So, what am I seeing and what's happening with purpose is people are now starting to need and understand the importance of connecting from the inside out. If I'm going to do work for this long period of time, at the end of the day, the money isn't going to motivate me. It's not going to make me happy. It's not going to keep me engaged. And so people are starting to ask those questions and want those answers. And that's kind of what we're seeing across the board is helping people instead of blindly pursue a goal or an objective that they feel is the right thing, actually helping people stop, pause, take stock, understand themselves really well so that whatever they choose is more sustainable, more positive, more within their control, and something that's more energizing. And that doesn't matter, right? I work with retirees and I work with high school kids, and it's the same story for everybody. If you give people time to be intentional about the actions they're going to commit to, and you let them make the decision after reflecting on what makes them and matters to them, their commitment is significantly higher and stronger and more powerful. Like the origin of this, if I can ramble a little bit longer, the origin of this was I've always managed teams and I always felt like if I had to ask people to do work, I was asking them to do work for the entire year. If I could help people connect to the work personally, then they were off to the races and we were building amazing teams. And so as soon as I became a manager, which started at Prudential, every like holiday season, I would ask my teams, I'd be like, hey, take this 1 or 2 weeks that you are off. And I just want you to come back to work and tell me what you want to do. I want you to think hard about what you want to do. I want you to update your resume or your LinkedIn, and I want you to tell me what you want to do next. What was amazing is people would take that time and the number of people that would come back and say, I know that I don't want to be here anymore. The number of people that would leave my teams would spike in January, right? Because they weren't connected, but everybody else would come in committed. We could replace people. The people that wanted to leave, we could do an excellent glide path for, help them find the thing they wanted to do, write grad school recommendations, help them start a business, whatever. But everybody was clear and opted into what they wanted to do. So you spent less time trying to like convince people to do work and more time helping people do their best work. So universally applicable, the world order has changed. People have more time to think about these challenges. They've seen what just following the playbook does. And now we're at a place where we just need to be more intrinsically motivated, more sustainable. It's just more sustainable.
Wow, that's really powerful. So I guess, do you find that people like what's the age group to, I mean, I know you talked about, college students all the way up to retirees. Like, is there a particular age group that you're finding, like in midlife that start asking these questions more, or is it kind of all across the board?
It's all across the board, right? So the hypothesis for me started with my teams, right? So I would work with my teams, and then I was 25-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds. I would work with these people, and everybody would get to a point where they would plateau. And the issue is, how would you help them break through that plateau? And it wasn't going to be through more pressure. It wasn't going to be through giving them a salary increase. It was going to be helping them identify what they wanted to do next. And what was powerful for me was I did this thing, and I would do this for my teams, and I then started executive coaching. And a breakthrough moment for me was I had a retired someone who just exited his second company. He had two amazing kids who were married and successful. He was a brilliant entrepreneur and a community participant. So far as he'd helped build you know, like music venues in his municipality, right? So he was an active local participant, great marriage, great kids, successful businessman. We get on a call, he's referred to me by a friend, and the call starts with, "Suneet, I don't know why I'm here." 67, right? He's like, "I don't know why I'm here." And I'm like, "Okay, this just blew my mind because if you don't know why you're here,
Mhm.
then what I don't know anything." So we have this conversation, get to this breakthrough moment. And the breakthrough moment was not that he wasn't successful and didn't know why he was here. He hadn't stopped to acknowledge all the amazing things he had done, to take credit for and celebrate why he was there and what he'd done. That was the takeaway. So I was like, all right, then I started working with, a Fortune 1000 C-suite executive who Mother of the Year award winner, PTO, three children, present for everything, like just an incredible woman. And same question, right? In her early 40s, why am I here? And so what I did was build this coaching practice. And I was like, okay, the coaching practice, why are we waiting for people to hit midlife and then raise their hand and say, I don't know why I'm here? What if we were to equip people with this stuff earlier? So worked with a retiree, work with mid-level executives. So I drafted a one pager and I pitched it to Duke and Rutgers. And Rutgers was like, come, you've got a class, teach this framework to our students 3.5 years ago. And then Duke was like, hey, you're kind of far away, but come do this once a year for some of our fellows. And I was like, okay, that's amazing. And it resonates there. So then I started last year, I was like, all right, let me take a cohort of high school students and do this with them. And it worked with, six high school students. I've got 15 students I'm doing it with back where I grew up in South Jersey. I'm doing it with like 15, 16 high school students now. And some of the stuff I do with my kids, right? Like, and they're 11 and 9. So your question is, when does this is there a cohort? The key is only people who are willing to say, I am on a plateau, I'm stuck. There's something better. I want something better. I'm capable of something better. And I'm willing to be vulnerable and honest to figure it out. And then you can be any age and you can get there. But everybody needs this space and grace right now. It doesn't matter. High school kids, I'm on the board of education for my town, and we just talked about this SEL stuff across, you know, elementary, middle, high school. Like, everybody needs this stuff right now because nobody has the space and grace. We're overwhelmed with information, but we haven't had the time to figure out what makes us and matter to us. So we don't know how to make sense of it. We just solve the problem in the moment. We hack at the branch and not the root. And so that's why we struggle. So we all need it. We all need it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think when we prioritize speed in all aspects of life, we don't take the time that we need to slow down in all the aspects that you just described. I think COVID was such an interesting inflection point for all of us who were still either in that, capitalistic mindset of I have to provide for my family. We need an income. We need money to be able to do all the things and all the dreams that we've all created in our own heads. You balance that with what happened to different socioeconomic parts of our country that were more impacted or less impacted by COVID. And that social contract that you described in your intro it showed not only fissures but total cracks and breaks and separation of people, and a fragmentation of people just not really understanding each other. And then that even further accelerated this lack of either time or importance being placed that you should take a few minutes to figure out what is important to you individually. And people don't feel like they have the luxury of time to do that, exactly that. And so my difficult question for you is to say, so how do we enable that? Because you're one person, you're creating a great movement. Chirag and I talk about this stuff and the importance of us taking time to talk to ourselves and then talk to each other, build community and build a support structure to help you figure these things out. And I feel like, Suneet, in the absence of us being intentional about this, capitalistic structures tell us what is important. And so we have to find a way to give all of us as individuals time and grace, like you say. I really love that phrasing, to do our own self exploration to find our meaning and purpose. So how do we do that, in general, and create a whole movement and make this a bit more widespread?
Yeah. I mean, I think the important thing is not to make it overwhelming, right? Is to say that some is better than none. Optimize for the starting line. There's this great author and award-winning author, Britt Frank, who always talks about getting unstuck and getting aligned. Her phrase is, too often we optimize for the finish line when you should be optimizing for the starting line. So when you're trying to get something built and going, don't think about how it's going to finish and don't think about perfect. Just optimize for the starting line. Just like get started, right? And I think it's not complicated. So there's an exercise I do. It's called happy, proud, not yet satisfied. I do it with my kids. I do it with, you know, hundreds of people online. Like I do it in conferences, in my classes, et cetera. It's a really simple premise. Like, how do you start taking back control of the cues that the world is giving you and asking you to respond to? Well, before you take action and before you pick something you're going to do, acknowledge that we are hardwired for negativity bias. That's the first thing, which means that if we're not intentional, we have a scarcity mindset. And as a result of that, we're going to be operating from a place of fear, concern, protection, like all those basic instincts that kept us alive when we were cave people or when we were infants, this sort of fear mentality. What you have to do is offset that, right? So before you think of what you want to do or an action you want to take, literally pause for a moment and say, okay, what made me happy? What just put a smile on my face? Like decouple it from accomplishment. What just makes me smile? What are the things that make me smile? Okay. I'm going to work. What are the things about work that make me smile? Just take a minute. Let me just think about the things that make me smile. That's what makes me happy. Great. Decouple that. The second thing is what gives me confidence? What makes me proud? Right? Not prideful, but proud. What are the things that I want to talk about? Like if I'm in an interview, if I'm on a date, if I'm like with people I respect and admire, what's a story I want to tell them where I felt my confidence grow? Independent of whether or not I accomplished anything, where did I feel my confidence grow? It could have been from a failure, but I felt my confidence grow. If you take a minute to do both of those things, imagine how you're going to approach your to do list. Imagine how you're going to approach the action you take. And like, I do that with my son when he comes back from soccer. I'm like, hey, man, like, what happened today that like made you happy about the soccer game? He's like, well, we won. I'm like, no, no, no. Just like what made you happy? He's like, oh, being with my friends, like the snacks after. I'm like, great, made you smile. How'd you feel about how you played today? And he's like, "Oh, well, like I did this really well, whatever." I'm like, "Great. What do you want to work on next?" And he's like, up. He's like ready to go and think about the thing he wants to work on next. And so it's little tricks like that where you retrain your brain and reframe your mindset that helps you start taking back control from the instincts and the hard wiring. It can start to get more intense. So you talked about we're just on to the next thing. We're pacing, we're moving on to what's next. Like there's so much happening. If you haven't taken the time to understand your values and what matters to you, what's important to you, you're not going to make good decisions. Like all the research shows that human beings are terrible decision makers. But the reason we're terrible decision makers and the reason we can't move fast as we want to is because we haven't stopped to really calibrate our decision making engine. Like, what makes us happy? What makes us proud? What are we good at? What do we value? Where do we tend to get stuck? Where do we tend to overthink? Like, if you do all that work up front, then every time you face a decision, you can be like, okay, this is my bias. I've got to offset that. Boom, boom, boom. And then I'm off and I'm making better decisions. And then when the world comes at you, you can very quickly say, "Hey, that's neat. Like, thank you. I'm gonna take that. That aligns with who I am. That's neat. I want to explore that. That's great. The third and the most important thing is, hey, thank you so much. That has nothing to do with me. That's all about you. That feedback has nothing to do with my context. That alert has nothing to do with what matters to me. So I'm just going to take that and put it down and not carry it. And if we can equip people to do those things, then there's less burden, there's less anxiety, there's better decision making, and it's more aligned. But all of that starts with like self awareness. You just got to take space and grace, give people space to like figure themselves out, do some work on themselves, and grace to like experiment with it. And if you do that, it becomes really powerful. Like it just becomes really powerful.
I believe it. I
I
believe
love
it.
that
That's so
framework.
true. And I think what you're describing, oh, sorry, Chirag, just real quick, I'll hand it over to you. I just want
Yeah.
to make a quick comment that I feel like what you're describing is also like that would create this mindset if in people that we're all going through this difficult period together, and almost to give people the benefit of the doubt of their intentions being positive or altruistic, and not that their intentions are based in sort of this like intent to harm you or intent to disagree with you or intent to cause you extra stress. Like, no, everybody is sort of, moving 100 miles an hour trying to figure out life. And, sometimes if they make a choice that they, like you disagree with, like, okay, like it's okay to have that conversation. But, you go in with positive intent and curiosity as opposed to assuming that it was a malicious snide at you or something like that. So I love all that because I think the more you work on yourself, the more space and grace not only do you give yourself, but the more space and grace you'll give others as well. So it has to start with the individual. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, dude, it
Yeah.
absolutely like I'll share, yesterday, Sunday, me and my daughter are going on this to her soccer game. Um, and we get into this like 11-year-old get in this deep conversation. And she, it's quiet time. There's, so she's asking me questions and um, she's like, how do she asked me about child abuse. She's like, how does that happen? It was, I think we were listening, like NPR was on in the background. She's like, how does that even happen? And I was like, all right. I was like, all right, well, let's go through it. I was like, I've yelled at you, right? Like, I'm like, I've yelled at you. Like, I've been gotten really mad at you and I've yelled at you, right? I'm like, so you can imagine that like I can like a parent can get really mad. And she's like, yeah. She's like, but you've never touched me, blah, blah. I'm like, I get it. But I'm like, now look at our life. I'm like, me and your mom have jobs. We have a beautiful house. We have a great neighborhood. We have your nana and nani, your grandparents, like 2 miles away. I was like, we have nothing to complain about. And I still lose my temper sometimes. And I was like, now imagine somebody who is only a single parent, worked 16 hours a day, right? And no, like we've talked about healthcare, I'm like, doesn't know if they should buy medicine or food. Put all that stuff together. And I'm like, can you imagine a situation where someone hasn't, like, just doesn't have the time to think about like life and like the burdens of life? And I'm like, can you imagine some of these situations? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, look, some people do it because they're just, whatever. But if you can imagine that there's a context and a reason where somebody's struggling with something, and instead of then trying to be critiquing, does that at least make you pause to ask the question about why somebody did something instead of leaping to all these other situations? The very least, you can solve that problem without anger. Solve it with curiosity, with questions, with help. You understand it's not just about penalty, it's about all these other things. And so, like, that's what was interesting was this idea of space and grace is like, yeah, sometimes we have more time for it based on socioeconomic conditions, mindset. And I think that's also part of the truth of this is sometimes we make these things feel like so heavy and so intensive. If we can if we can give people just a little bit of space and grace every day to like get some tools to equip people to have these conversations with themselves, maybe you can have, I don't know, maybe there's more moments, but I think like that conversation about who can do it, how they can do it, and like teaching my daughter about like curiosity and questions like how do you create that space for yourself and for other people is super important because again, we judge ourselves based on our best intentions and we judge others based on their worst actions. If we can do this for other people, it creates a flywheel even more than ourselves. Like if you're a manager, if you can do this, if you're a parent, do this for your kids. If you're a manager, do this for your employees. If you're a community member, do this for your neighbors. Like maybe the place sometimes to start is doing it for somebody else, which is powerful.
Yeah, I think you said it right. Like some people don't have the tools, right? And I think it's that giving them the tools and the capability to do that, they might not have just any sense of how to even go about it. So I think that that's probably pretty key. I want to go back to talk a little bit about kind of the process of finding purpose, and more specifically, people like who are kind of in that you know burned out or at some kind of a breaking point. Do you find like we're all naturally, I think human beings are afraid of change to a certain extent, right? Do you find that it's necessary to hit that breaking point before they're able to go and make that big of a change in their life? Or do you think it can come without having to get to that point?
I think it can come without having to get to that point, but I think we are a disaster response society. Like we only respond to crises. We only fund nonprofits when there's a disaster. Like we don't invest in infrastructure, but we are a disaster response society. And so that's the cue. And that's how we help. But no, I think I've seen people, it goes back to are you at that moment where you're willing to say and admit that you are stuck? For acknowledge and then forgive, right? Self forgiveness is critical and then are you willing to be vulnerable and explore the truth to figure out how you can get going? Now, why do people talk about doing it at rock bottom? It's because there's no other option. They've exhausted all other options, right? So they're obviously willing to do it because they're doing it from a place of desperation. But imagine if you were able to do it with every day. If you were able to just evaluate the moment and say, missed on this, like let me recalibrate, reset, reimagine what I can do next and let me find momentum. Like if you were to create that habit loop, that's a lot more that's a lot more powerful. It just only happens when people hit rock bottom because there's no other options. It's a forcing function. It's traumatic. There's literally nothing else to do. But imagine if you could actually do that before you hit rock bottom. And it's possible. You just have to have keep going back to space and grace. You just got to take time for yourself to like pause, reflect, experiment, iterate, be really vulnerable and honest but self-forgiveness is, like, the most important thing, which people don't learn. Like, there's research that I quote in my book is, like and it's not mine, it's research that's out there. They do this study on students procrastinating, and it's a small panel study. It doesn't matter, but it's been proven over and over again. They take these students and it's like 119 students, they break them into 2 categories. They just procrastinated on a test, and they take a cohort of those students and they say, "Okay, forgive yourself, acknowledge your procrastination, forgive yourself, and move forward." The other students, they just kind of let be and they continue to reinforce their guilt. They're like, oh, I procrastinated. I feel bad. Let that habit form. They get to the second test. Who do you think procrastinated more? Like the students who forgave themselves procrastinated less. They did better. They let it go and they procrastinated less. The students who did worse were the ones that beat themselves up over procrastinating, then they procrastinated more. And so, like, this idea of self forgiveness is something that doesn't happen. And sometimes you hit rock bottom there's nothing else. There's nobody else that's gonna forgive you. It's just you and yourself, and that's why you get to work. You can't externalize any of the problems. You can't put your fingers in anybody else. It's like rock bottom, and it's just you. You gotta deal with it, and that's when self-awareness starts. But you shouldn't have to wait for the world to crumble or a crisis situation to be able to do this work.
I wanted to connect with your question, Chirag, with what Sunit is doing because, and maybe even connect it to the thread that you and I spent a lot of time talking about teachers, and we interviewed several teachers, Sunit, and we were talking to them about what the future of education is. And it's very hard to reframe education without looking at the current infrastructure. Like almost the exercise to anybody listening, imagine revamping the entire education system from the ground up. And I have a hard time not including courses on what you're doing from elementary school onward. There's no reason some of the questions that you're asking your children, we could not ask of elementary school age children. When the emphasis is not on, hearing a bell and moving to the next classroom because that's how factories work, yet the emphasis is more on who are you, what do you stand for, and what are you going to contribute to this world. I think it frames the whole trajectory of your life in a different way, to the point that, Chirag, we're going through the period like where we have to hit a breaking point before we pay attention to this stuff. And if we're getting proactive and teaching the kids at a very young age with this infrastructure to start creating the skills to cope with adversity that comes to them, maybe it gets ahead of the mental health crisis that we're currently feeling in our country for all the reasons that we covered already. So, kudos to you, Suneet, for going on your school board. I know that's not easy. I know local town politics of people that are on the school board, regardless of your position. If you have an opinion, you're going to have half of your population are going to have some, objection to the way that you view things. But we need people to progress as a country, as a society, as a town. So I would love to hear about what your experience on the school board has been like. Are people resonating with what you're talking about? What do you see as some hope in the future of how we can infuse more of what you're doing within our education
Yeah.
system?
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say that I love, our small borough here in New Jersey. I just came out of a committee meeting where there was an emphasis on social emotional learning. New Jersey has standards around SEL. Our school district is proactive in implementing those thoughtfully. And so people are talking about this stuff and bringing it to students. So I think that is great. I think more of these conversations are happening. I think we see it, even Rutgers. I take pride in, my course somehow made it to, well, through a friend, made it into the strategic planning discussion for the School of Arts and Sciences at Rutgers. And based on the curriculum, based on my syllabus, the first pillar for the 5-year strategic plan was helping students find their purpose. So this is becoming something that we have to do. And I think, look, selfishly, it is because for a long time, high school and college were transactions. You go to high school to get into college, you go to college to get a job. And as soon as all that stuff got blurry and students couldn't connect the dots straight through, I think the true nonlinear nature of growth and personal growth and development has started to emerge. And as a result, schools, high schools, colleges have to add value more thoughtfully than just pushing you into a career, et cetera. And part of that is we have to help you know yourself. What I love when my high school students leave my cohort, or when my college students leave my cohort, or frankly, when executives leave my professional cohort, the thing I love the most is not when they say, "I've found my purpose." It's when they say, "I'm gonna be okay. I'm doing better. I'm doing a lot that I need to do. I know what I need to do next. I know who I am, and I know I'm gonna be okay." And that's powerful. And that, I think, is reimagining what is the reason you go to college? It's not to get a job. It's to know yourself really well so you can find the job that helps you self-actualize, reach your potential, and maximize your impact. And it's not just, "I went to college so I can get a job." And that's why we went to college, was like, that's how you get a job. And so I think that that contract has changed, right? And so lagging indicator, right, is how education policy changes to meet things that happened, the realities of 10 years ago. But that's what I'm seeing, and I'm really love what I'm seeing, in my district. I really love what I'm seeing at Rutgers on the faculty council there. Same thing, right? Which is when life gets crazy, all hope is local. Just jump in where you are. Like, just jump in and make an impact where you are, and that's the best thing you can do, and that's what I tell my kids, like, "Live here, give here." That's what we do. That's how we participate. But I am seeing it happen and come to life, and part of it's necessity. Because think of how many kids are graduating disgruntled. Like, "I got this degree, and I have all this cost, and I have all this debt. What have you given me?" And if the only thing you can say is, "Well, I got you your first job," I don't know. The emotional ties back to the university aren't gonna be there. If you can say, hey, I created space for you to really learn about yourself and understand who you are, what makes you and matters to you, give you the confidence to show up in the world in a way where you maximize your impact and you know what that is or have an inkling of what that is, you got a very different relationship with your students.
So how fast do you think education can change? Because it's as an industry, do you think it seems to be a little more slow moving, right? In terms of how it brings in new concepts and new teaching methods and new concepts like finding your purpose. Like how are you seeing that it can happen if it's happening locally, can it spread fast or do you think it's going to take a long time for it to spread throughout the system?
I think, look, I think it's not about like a singular system. And I think that like if we look at education as this just like the public education system, then I think it's going to take a long time. But if you think about how we engage and educate our youth, that's different, right? Like, what type of content are we making available? What type of media are we making available? What type of books are we producing? What types of coaching are we allowing? What types of extracurriculars are happening? And I think it's like, it becomes this, it's not just a single point of failure. We've got to envelop our kids in this in as many different angles as possible. And so I think changing, changing the public education system is going to be hard, right? And long, but you have to fight that fight because you make one policy change, you get at a budget for a social emotional learning in your district, and you've affected thousands of students. That might be a 3-year fight, but wow, like legacy in a generation of students happens, but then you can supplement it, right? You do extracurricular activities. There's different ways of doing it. So I think what we have to do is say this is something we value and then figure out the ways to get it in short term, medium term, long term to bring it to life. But we're past the days of like, you know, a single revolutionary act. The world moves too quickly, and you can't expect public education to react that whiplash. There's a social responsibility and a civic responsibility that the public education system has to standardize, normalize, and ensure a baseline, right, level of service and support. And that's the curse and the benefit of federal state services is that they are there for to establish a floor, right? The issue is the innovation that happens on top, private sector, nonprofit sector, families, extracurriculars, all that stuff. Hopefully that helps
Yeah.
the answer, but
Yeah.
it's not about just public education. That raises the floor, everything else raises the ceiling.
I feel like, Sunit, this where we are in society, where you are with this, it reminds me when you form a new team in corporate America and you go through the storming, forming, norming, performing. And I
Yeah.
feel like we are
Mhm.
totally storming right now. And I think when you are in this storming mode, people feel like there's people that feel like you that say, "Hey, I have a way that I think we can do better because I see what's around me isn't working and I think that these are the right ingredients to start baking into the pie to make something really beautiful and delicious." And kudos to you for doing that. I think there's others that are waiting for people like you, perhaps even maybe to a certain small degree, Chirag, what you and I do on the podcast, if we're having conversations like this, because your phrase of all hope is local, so powerful. It really is. Because if you're feeling like, my gosh, like all these international events and all of the political sort of turmoil that our country is going through is overwhelming, and you're waiting for someone to fix it for you. The simple question is, why are you waiting? Why do you not feel empowered that your word choices, your decisions every day, your career choices, how you spend your time, what you're engaging with, where you're getting your information, who you're speaking to, who are you giving your time to? Are you giving it away? Or are you taking the time to figure out for yourself what's important to you? And then figure out how do you leave your mark and your impact on the world around you? And I feel like we've lost a sense of empowerment, and that every conversation that you have is that ripple in a pond that goes out into the world and impacts everything else around you. And so if you're not minding your ear gate, if you're not minding your mouth gate, you're not creating the future that you want someone else to create for you. And so I think there's so much to what you're doing. And I guess my question is, how do you get people that are maybe not even ready to have this type of a conversation, don't even feel that they have the time to focus on themselves, to pull them out of that and give them a sense of empowerment and make them feel like, hey, your word choices and your information sources do matter.
Yeah. I mean, look, a few things come to mind. I think the first thing I say is one of the reasons why people don't act is I think people overestimate the outcome required for them to take action. So they have high expectations of massive change quickly, and I think part of that is the instant feedback world that we're in. We never see the work; we only see the outcome, and so I think part of that is people are like, "Oh, I got to do something big." Right, and so I think there's an element of that, which is people are just, if I do, is it going to matter, right? Of significance. So that's something I think we have to change, which is how do you take pleasure in the input and the action and not the outcome and it. And so if you can do that, that's powerful. It's what we talk to our kids about. Like locus of control. What can you control? What can't you control? Any Duke's book on, life is not chess or checkers, it's poker, right? And there's always a flop. Like that sort of stuff is important. The second thing is I don't try and change people's minds. There's too many people ready to do this work where you engage. And I think I will talk to anybody, but I'm terrible at changing minds. Like, and I think the benefit to being in the storming phase is just find the early adopters, right? So I think I think that's really important. And then the last thing is like just do the work, right? Like it's just do the work. There's this fable I used to talk to my kids about. It was like the hummingbird and the forest fire. And like there's this forest fire, and there's like this little pond all the way over there, and all the animals are freaked out. The elephant is freaked out. Like all these animals that could do something are freaked out, and so this hummingbird flies to the pond, takes one drop of water, flies back, drops it on the forest fire, and just keeps doing that. In the beginning, everybody's laughing at the hummingbird, like, "Come on, right? Like, it's a joke." It just keeps doing it, and then at some point, the elephant's like, "Alright, well, I might as well try too." And then at some point, all the animals gather and they're carrying water back, and they ultimately put out the forest fire. It started with the hummingbird and that, like, single drop of water. And I think everybody wants to be the elephant. Someone's gotta be the hummingbird, and, like, just be the hummingbird. Just get started, and at the very least, your life was spent purposefully. Impact or not, right? Purposefully. And then you're gonna die happy anyway, right? At the very least, you did something meaningful and purposeful that you were aligned to that you believed in. Holy hell. Like if you can live a life that way, it's pretty amazing. But I do think there's that element of people want outsized outcomes if they're not going to make a big impact that they can talk about like they feel less than. And that goes back to an earlier conversation, which is how do you celebrate, right? Like how do you celebrate people, create space and grace them? Have you seen that YouTube video about B number two? Like there's a dude dancing on a hill like at a concert or something, and like everyone thinks they're
Oh,
crazy. And then number 2 goes up and it turns in, right? Like the second person comes up and dances and becomes a party. So like be number 1, and then if you can't, then be number 2. That's where you turn a crazy person dancing into a party, right? And so there's like interesting things like that. But I'm not like no false humility. I don't have a following. I'm not good at rallying people for stuff. That's not what I'm good at. So I think just taking action in whatever universes where I can find like influence is good for me. And so being in a classroom where like it's just us, then I can have an influence, right? Sitting on the board, it's captive. I can participate. Like that's where I tend to do best. Urban Meyer, I got to listen to him talk, and Urban Meyer is Urban Meyer, but it is what it is. But I heard him when he was still at Ohio State. I heard him at a corporate retreat, and he told a story about how he builds football teams. And he said, "Take my top 10%, my top 5%. Let's just go with 10% for easy math." And he's like, "I focused on my top 10%. I focused on Tim Tebow, and when I focus on Tim Tebow, the next 80% aligns and follows Tim Tebow. And that last 10%, I don't worry about. They're going to take care of themselves, or the rest of the team is going to take care of them for me. But I focus on the people interested who can lead and motivate and move. And if I do that, the rest of the change will come." And I was like, that's pretty neat. and also partially a Denver Broncos fan, Tim Tebow, I appreciate, but it's like a neat it was a neat s he's like, "I don't worry about the bottom 10%. I really focus on my best, like my best, and I set the expectation that they are going to enlist and hold accountable those people. Because if I don't get them, those people in the middle are looking for somewhere to look. They're gonna look at the bottom 10% because it's easy." And so that was his focus. So I think that's also as you think about action, like, whose mind do you spark?
Wow, that's a great anecdote. I'm cognizant of time. I know you have another board of education meeting to get to. You mentioned your book earlier. I'd love for you to give us like a 1 minute pitch on your book and spread the word.
Amazing. So I am finalizing the title. It's taken me longer to pick the title than to write the book. But the premise of the book is my course, and it is how do you gain clarity? How do you build momentum? And I say, how do you find your Kieran? Kieran is my dad's name who passed away. Kieran also means light. It means your ray of light. And the premise is that purpose is not something you chase. It is something you arrive at through self awareness, exploration, experimentation, iteration. And so the book is structured as 18 chapters. Each chapter is a specific way and lens through which you can understand yourself. So, happiness, strengths, values, dreams, like each chapter is a different way for you to understand yourself and explore yourself. And each chapter is broken up into 4 parts. The first part is an exercise and a prompt. So you just answer this question. Then I give you the research about that question I asked you. So you can instantly compare and contrast your biases, your instincts, like how you do. Then I pull in a story for somebody I've worked with or coached who's been affected by that chapter. And they tell their story about how their journey was and how it affected them. And then the last part is a soundtrack and a song. So there's a song analysis associated to that theme. So like Bill Withers' Lovely Day for happiness. But I don't tell you, like I don't do a lyrical analysis. I tell you why Bill Withers wrote the song. And the benefit is if you ever hear that song again, it should trigger the exercise, the research, and the story. And so you could be driving your car and get pulled back into that thought. So each one has those 4 pillars, and the premise being everybody learns differently. Some people learn by doing, some people learn through evidence and data, some people learn through story, and some people learn just eccentrically through song. If I can activate all 4 of those, then ideally it's going to click with a lot and it's really going to stick with many. Like that's the game plan.
Well,
Amazing.
Suneet, we started this podcast to engage and find interesting people for us to connect with. This was phenomenal. I can't thank you enough for the time and the work that you've done. Look forward to the book when it comes out, and wish you much continued success. And thanks for all that you're doing. I really appreciate it, and thanks for the conversation.
Dude, amen, guys. Thank you so much. You said it, like, you're holding space for conversation about stuff that matters to you. It started as 2 friends, and you're pulling people in, and, like, there's nothing more powerful and local than that. The fact that you commit to, like, having this conversation, finding people, going deep, and then publishing this and getting it out is pretty amazing. Like, this is what we need more of, and I enjoyed it. I loved the conversation. It was good to meet you and connect, and Chirag, man, it's good to see you, bud.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Well, we're gonna have to have you back because I think there's a lot of stuff I'd still like to talk to you about. So I think we left a lot on the
Let's
table.
do it.
All
I
right,
love it.
awesome. That's the
Happy to.
pod. Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Renee.
Awesome. Take care, folks.